Braves and baseball fans, it's time to take a trip from coast to coast across Major League Baseball.
There it goes, a long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
One strike away. Sandy into his windup. Here's the pitch. Swung out and missed a perfect game.
Fly ball deep left center. Grissom on the run. Yes! 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 The Atlanta Braves have given you a championship. Listen to this crowd.
Left side, Swanson to first. Braves are world champions.
Braves and baseball talk, straight from the diamond. Here's Grant McAuley.
Hello and welcome to From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley. This is our first big broadcast of the offseason. I know it's been a little bit over a month since I've been able to bring a new show to you, but we've been playing the waiting game and ultimately needed some dominoes to start falling, and we certainly got a big one that happened this week as the Braves named Walt Weiss their new manager. And that will be what we lead off with here on the show. We're also going to go through a few of your questions that you sent in a little while ago about what's going to be going on this winter as far as the Braves offseason moves and shopping, because that is officially underway. Free agents are happening because the World Series is over. The Dodgers beat the Blue Jays in 7 games. It was, I would say, in a lot of ways, an instant classic, and in other ways, one that you'll probably say what if about if you're a Toronto Blue Jays fan. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We've got to get into the news for the Atlanta Braves, and our headline is the hiring of Walt Weiss. I think most Braves fans are pretty familiar with Weiss because he's been on Brian Snitker's coaching staff for the last 8 seasons, and if you've been a Braves fan since at least the 90s, then you saw Walt Weiss play shortstop for the Braves late in that decade as part of his 14-year playing career. You might also be familiar with his work with the Colorado Rockies, where not only was he a player and a coach, but he also managed there from 2013 through 2016 before taking a year off and jumping back into the coaching game with the Braves as Atlanta's bench coach the past 8 years. And that's a short version of his resume, but I think that the big conversations that have gone on over the past month, and there have been a lot of them, about what direction the Braves should go with this hire. When Brian Snitker made the decision to step down effective just after the 2025 season, it opened up, I think, one of the more attractive jobs in baseball, and certainly for a team that has expectations of getting right back to the business of winning after an off year, there's a lot of pressure to get this hire right. But where I think the interesting conversations were happening, especially among Braves fans and those who've kind of watched the last couple of years and just wondered, all right, well, what's the direction of this club, and is a different message what this team needs? And I think that that's a fair line of conversation, and one that we've had quite a bit on the show, and one that I don't think we were really able to have throughout the course of the season because you just didn't know for sure if Brian Snitker was going to be back or not. But there were a lot of names thrown out there. Some of them with no managerial experience whatsoever. Some of them, Walt Weiss included, who had limited managerial experience, hadn't done it in a while, and weren't necessarily even successful in previous stops. I mean, I guess you could look at David Ross, for example, as someone who did have some success, but ultimately his time in Chicago was rather short as well, and he didn't really end up being on the Braves' radar over the course of this coaching search. And there were other names that were thrown around from across the league, whether that was Mark DeRosa, whose only managerial experience is Team USA in the World Baseball Classic, whether it was John Gibbons, who managed the Toronto Blue Jays under Alex Anthopoulos and left the Mets coaching staff in October just after the season and seemed to be at least out there to be a discussion point. And then you saw some of these guys that really had no managerial experience to speak of in the big leagues. You'd be dealing with the first-time manager. And I never really was convinced that that was a direction that the Braves were going to go. Would they consider it? Yes. Should they consider it? Absolutely they should. I just feel like there's some unknown factors that do come with that when it is that first job. And not to skip ahead too much, but Walt Weiss talked a little bit about this in his press conference that I was attending on Tuesday at Truist Park about that first year of having to get to know that new club. Are the Braves a team that really was in the business of the get-to-know-you period after a disappointing season, in the midst of, I think as we all know and have talked about on whatever side of the aisle you're on with this particular hiring, that this is the window, right? You've got some of the best players, a great core. You've got to do something with it. So do you want to roll the dice on a year in which there might be just another unknown of having a manager getting to know the organization, getting to know the team, all of those things? I mean, It's all out there on the table. And should that be the only reason that Walt Weiss becomes the manager? Well, of course not. But I do think that it might be one of the more underrated and overlooked parts of elevating Walt Weiss from the bench coach role to the manager's seat. Now, the one other factor in all of this that I think that people have really gotten caught up on is the different voice, different message, that Walt Weiss essentially is just an extension of Brian Snitker and nothing more. I don't feel like that is necessarily an accurate portrayal of Walt Weiss. Number one, because we don't really know yet. And I would say that based on their personality types, they might share some similarities, but from the people that you see around the game and talk to around the game and hear from around the game publicly, including Chipper Jones and others, Walt Weiss is a fiery guy who has his own personality and his own way of doing things. And I will tell you this, and you'll hear a little bit later, I asked Walt Weiss about this. You worked with Brian Snitker. You were managed by Tony La Russa. You were managed by Bobby Cox, a lot of other great baseball men. Where do you take that experience and how do you incorporate that into your managerial style? And while he was quick to credit all of those guys for the experience that they gave him, he also wanted to make sure that it was absolutely known that this job is more than regurgitating the lessons and information you got from others. Does it help? Yes, but the personality that he's going to have and the way and the style in which he's going to manage this club, he is going to be distinctly his own. And I think that's something that only time is going to tell if that's effective, if that message hits home, if he's able to motivate the team in different ways that might help them to, see things a little bit differently than they have the past few years. And that's not an indictment on Brian Snitker, because I feel like the one thing that these two guys do share, just to jump on my soapbox for a moment, is how they relate to players. That does not mean that over the course of 162 games plus spring training, and if you're fortunate enough to play on through the playoffs, that everybody's going to get along all the time. I think we should know better than that. You got 26 different humans in that clubhouse, plus the coaching staff, plus a lot of support staff. There are going to be things that go on. You're not going to have a great day every single day just because you get to play the game you love. I mean, this is a hard grind through the season, and being able to manage those people, manage the expectations, and be able to bring everyone together as best you can on a daily basis, yes, that is a responsibility of the manager, and that's something I think Brian Snitker did far better than people may realize. Now, Walt Weiss is lauded for much the same approach of being a relationship builder and somebody who can help with that cultural aspect, if you want to call it that, of making sure that the team has the right tone and the right tenor and that they are going to be all pulling the rope in the same direction. And I don't think that the Braves have a clubhouse full of people that aren't interested in doing that to begin with. So when you add it all up, the continuity that the Braves were able to tap into by having Walt Weiss with 8 years of experience and knowing this team step into this role, that's something that I ultimately think was a big part of why the Braves chose to hire Walt Weiss. Now, there were other names, and as I mentioned, going with a relative unknown, if you will, an unknown commodity, someone with no managerial experience at the big league level, that was going to be a riskier proposition in a lot of ways. And whether that was Danny Lehman or George Lombard or Ryan Flaherty, the former Braves player who's also gotten into the coaching game, I mean, you saw the San Francisco Giants hire a college coach to be their manager. Will that pay off? We don't know, but the Giants are in a wholly different place than the Atlanta Braves are. So I think the thinking overall and the way that you weighed out the pros and cons of any and everybody that you talked to for this job, which, by the way, we never got a full head count from Alex Anthopoulos of how many interviews went on. Well, I think that there would be pros and cons for everybody, and I think that Walt Weiss checked a lot of boxes for the Braves. And if you flash back to 8 years ago, and I said this on social media, it felt like when Walt Weiss came in to serve as Atlanta's bench coach under Brian Snitker, we did not know how long Brian Snitker was going to continue managing. Keep in mind, at that time, that Brian Snitker had managed part of the 2016 season, the entire 2017 season. Both of those, the Braves lost 90 games each time. You didn't know how good things were about to get. But it did kind of feel like when Walt Weiss came on, to get back to the point here, that maybe he was going to be the heir apparent as far as the next manager of the Braves. Now, the Braves are not hiring a youthful manager here, but I do think that there's a lot of fire in Walt Weiss, which is something that I think a lot of people have been looking for and asking for from the Braves' managerial role over the past couple of years especially. But he is 61 years old. So how long will Walt Weiss be the manager of this club? We will find out. Will it be the kind of stint that Brian Snitker had, where it just kind of continued and the success was there, so it all made sense until he decided it was time to step away at near 70 years old? Well, we'll find out. But there were just a lot of different things that I think converged to make this a choice that maybe seemed obvious at one point. You kind of went away from it for a little while because I think you do owe it to yourself to do the due diligence, which the Braves said that they did, and then come back to the choice that you feel like fits the job the best. And I would say this, above any and everything else, and this is just my personal opinion about this, I think managers get way more of the blame when things go wrong and way more of the credit when things go right. I think that too much is made of both sides of that coin for managers. They are there to provide stability and continuity and leadership, but the players go out on the field and perform. Are there tactical decisions that can win or lose you a game? Yes, but are there as many as we think that there are? I'm not always convinced. Just because you could have made a different move doesn't mean it would have paid off either. But again, there are plenty of moves that I'll disagree with over the course of a 162-game baseball season and think, well, I would have done something else. But you also have to keep in mind, especially with pitchers, you're managing around health. You're managing around availability. You're managing for a longer-term process with the baseball season being as long as it is to kind of help these guys get through the entire season and be able to help you when you need them the most. So there's a lot of different ways we can go with it. We can spend a lot of time dissecting exactly how much credit or how much blame a manager deserves or doesn't deserve. Ultimately, you're measured by wins and losses. The organization is measured by that. The team is measured by that. The manager is measured by that. And if Walt Weiss can help the Braves get back to the winning that they expect to be doing, then this is a choice worth making for the Atlanta Braves, but it's one that only time will tell. All right, with all of that said, let's hear a little bit from the new manager of the Atlanta Braves. Here is Walt Weiss and his comments from Tuesday at Truist Park upon being named the 49th manager in franchise history, but just the 4th manager of the Braves since Bobby Cox took over midway through the 1990 season.
I'm very excited. Once Snit stepped away and I became a part of this, it was something I got really excited about. So, my history here, my last 8 years, I think I'm hoping it'll be a seamless transition here because of the relationships, not only with the players, but the front office, the support staff. There's respect and trust that flows up and down the chain of command. And so I think, for that reason, we can hit the ground running. The first time I did this, I came to realize that, it sounds weird, but it takes the better part of a year to truly understand your team. I'm talking about getting to know them on a deep level, what makes them tick, what situations they thrive in, even down to their body language and those types of things that we read into. So that's a process that takes the better part of a year, and I think, the fact that I've been here and a lot of those things are already established, like I said, we can hit the ground running. I understand the impact of this Braves brand. Played here for 3 years, obviously coached for 8 years. I understand the wide-reaching fan base, the history of this brand and how important it is to a lot of people, and how many people have worked really hard to make this brand really one of the envies of the sports world when you consider, like I said, our far-reaching fan base goes coast to coast. This venue we play in, the history here, the success, the Hall of Famers, and ultimately the people. The standards are really high, the expectations are high, and that's a good thing. It means you're doing something right. But I want to say thank you to Snit. Without Snit, I wouldn't be here. Snit and Bobby Cox brought me back into a Braves uniform 8 years ago. I loved these last 8 years working for Snit. I would have happily done it for another 10 years. If Snit went another 10 years, I'd have happily done it. So, learned a lot. I've evolved, from my first job in Colorado. I've learned a lot. The game has changed. I'm sure I've changed, and hopefully wiser. And I think we need to appreciate and respect what's gone on here the last 8 years on Snit's watch. And we need to maintain some perspective because I believe that, outside of any team called the Dodgers, every team in baseball is signing up for our last 8 years. Matter of fact, they're tearing a hole in the paper, signing up for it. So I think we need to keep that in mind and honor that and maintain some perspective and understand what this man in front of me has done.
There were a couple things that really jumped out to me from Walt Weiss's comments at his introductory press conference, and one of those was that he understands the expectations and the standards that goes with this job. You have to, if you're talking about the Atlanta Braves, because when you look at the winning that Atlanta has done, beginning in 1991, over the last 35 years, they have had 7 losing seasons. Some of those were happening as the club came out of the run of 14 straight titles and got into the 20 teens. Some of them were happening late in the 20 teens and were one of the reasons that Brian Snitker ever even got an opportunity to manage. But when you look at what's happened since 2018, With the exception of 2025, the Braves have once again established themselves as a gold standard organization where the expectations are you go out there and win, you get to the playoffs. And when you get to the playoffs, by the way, the goal there is to do a lot more winning than the Braves have been able to since that 2021 World Series title. Now, all of that is pretty boilerplate. That's pretty obvious. I think that's everybody's expectation. Is the manager going to be able to will this team to more wins than player performance will dictate? No, and I think we all know that as well. But I think all of these things work in concert, and getting somebody in who can provide that leadership and understands the role and the job as well as Walt Weiss does based on being inside this building for the last 8 years, I think that's one of the things that made him uniquely attractive for this job. Let's hear a little bit from Braves President of Baseball Operations and General Manager Alex Anthopoulos on how this managerial search played out.
Yeah, from my standpoint, obviously I've worked with Walt for 8 years, but I've worked with him in the role of being the bench coach and never had a conversation with him. As we all know, the manager and the bench coach, the roles are totally different. So, being able to talk to him for the first time about being the manager of this team, it's not, sure, you can use your past experiences and your experiences here with the Braves, but it's not the same conversation. And so as much as I knew Walt, I knew everybody on our staff. That doesn't mean everyone was a candidate. So the manager role is very different. It's unique. It's incredibly challenging. And some people aren't suited for it, in my opinion. Getting a chance, even though I knew the person and the man, he had that doesn't mean that he would have necessarily been the best person for the job. And so having finally had a conversation about the manager and what that entails, because we never had those discussions in 8 years here. That wasn't the role. Those are conversations that I have with Snit. And then obviously going through the process and doing our work and so on. But at the end of the day, this was about the best person. Internal, external, didn't matter. This is the third time I've done this. 2 other times I've gone external. And I never had a thought process of it needs to be internal. It's the best person, period. You hear different things about, the roster and this and that. The rosters change. You're going to change the manager at the same time. You need the right person, the right individual, no matter where they come from. And he stood out as the right man for the job.
One of the other things Walt Weiss talked about in depth is the fact that he has grown in the game since that first opportunity to manage with the Colorado Rockies. In fact, getting to be Rockies manager, that was a bit of a surprise even to him.
Look, the circumstances they couldn't be more different. When I took the job in Colorado, I was out of the game for 4 years. I had worked as a special assistant to the GM and the manager for 8 years, but I was gone for 4 years. I was coaching high school football. So I got pulled back into it. I got asked to do an interview, and I said, what the heck? I've never done this. I'll go through this process. It'll be a good experience for me. I ended up getting a job. So, And look, I took over. At that time, it was the season after the worst season in franchise history. Now, there's been some rougher times there recently, but at the time, it was the worst season in franchise history. There were some things there, culturally that took a lot of time and energy. Look, I love my time there. It gave me this opportunity. If I didn't do that job, I wouldn't be sitting here today. And I had great relationships there, and it really challenged me, and I'm very proud. Look, we didn't have a great record over that 4-year period. Very proud of what me and my staff did and the front office did as far as changing that culture and setting them up to be better. So I'm proud of that. Here it's obviously very different. Think about yourselves. Where are you, now compared to 12 or 13 years ago? Hopefully you're a little bit wiser. If not, you probably need to check yourself. So, yeah, I've experienced a lot at a high level. Like I said, I know what this brand means and how important it is and how high the standards are here. And that's what's exciting. I also know that I have people that I work for, they're going to have my back. I understand it's a performance-based business, and I get it. I've been in the major leagues for 35 years now in a variety of roles. So I get it. It's a bottom-line business. But the winning has to be a byproduct of the relationships you establish, the trust that you have with your players. When it comes to players, and as it relates to coaches and managers, typically they ask themselves 3 questions. Does he care about me? Can I trust him? And can he make me better? And, I feel like I've checked those 3 boxes already here over my last 8 years. So circumstances are completely different. and so are the expectations. But like I said, when the expectations are high, it means you're doing something well, so it's a good thing.
Walt Weiss talked a bit about what this last 8 years has been like for him, operating as the bench coach for the Braves, getting to work with Brian Snitker, the respect that he obviously has for Snit, who was in attendance for this managerial press conference. I think to boil all of this down, the Walt Weiss who is taking this job in 2025 is very different than the guy who left the Rockies after 2016. As I talked about a little bit earlier, I did want to ask Walt Weiss a bit about his playing career, and in specific, being able to play under some really great managers, Hall of Famers, and other great baseball men. I wanted to get a feel for how those lessons inform his managerial style.
Walt, I know you spoke glowingly about your time working on Brian Snitker's staff. You also, during your playing days, were able to play for some Hall of Fame managers, Bobby Cox, as well as Tony La Russa. I'm curious about those experiences from your playing days and now getting this opportunity to manage, how you incorporate that in the style in which you like to bring to your team.
Yeah. Oh, look, I mean, we're all a product of our experiences and the people we've been around. I was very fortunate to be around some great managers. And I take a little bit from all of them. I'm going to take things I've learned from Snit the last 8 years, as well as what I've learned from Tony La Russa, Bobby Cox, Renee Latchman, Don Baylor, Clint Hurdle. Those are all the managers I either played for or worked with. And look, I mean, that wisdom is shared, right? And that's how we get better, by being around wise people. So I'll take things from all those men, but in the end, it's going to look very different because it's going to be my personality, my leadership style, my personal touch. So the delivery will be very different from any of the guys I've been around. But yeah, I've been fortunate. I always say, look, I never want to act like I have all the answers, because we all know better. But most of the things I've learned over the course of my life and my career, I've learned through failure, by screwing up. But and the fact that I've been around some pretty smart, wise people in this game. Been fortunate to have been around some high-level people, and every once in a while I paid attention. So a lot of the stuff I've stolen from other people and made it my own, and that's what's going to make it unique in the end.
All right, so good to hear a little bit from the new Braves manager, Walt Weiss. It's a 3-year contract with a 4th-year option as well, so he will be managing the Atlanta Braves through 2028 with the possibility of 2029 as well. We don't have the complete Atlanta coaching staff just yet, but there were some changes that were announced on Wednesday afternoon, as both pitching coach Rick Kranitz and first base coach Tom Goodwin will not be back. Mark Bowman of MLB.com added that Fredi Gonzalez, the former Atlanta manager who came back to be the third base coach, was also informed that he would not be returning to the Atlanta coaching staff next season. So that makes 3 guys who are on their way out. But as these things go, already some announcements about who is coming in to replace them. The Braves have plucked not 1 but 2 coaches from the New York Mets coaching staff, bringing over pitching coach Jeremy Hefner and first base coach Antoan Richardson, a couple of very respected additions to Walt Weiss's staff. Now, we don't know who the third base coach is going to be just yet, but that person will also be in charge of the infield coaching duties, depending on what maybe Ron Washington is doing. Perhaps there'll be a call there. I don't know. That might be a pipe dream, but it would be fun to inject that energy and that familiar face back into the Braves clubhouse. But putting that aside, in the next few days, weeks, we will hear, I'm sure, a full Braves coaching staff and get the breakdown of everything. Now, Rick Kranitz, I think, had a very good run across his 7 seasons on the staff for Brian Snitker. The Braves led Major League Baseball in ERA in 2024, but of course we know what 2025 was, a season full of injuries to the pitching staff. I don't think you can point at the pitching coach because there's not a whole lot you can do when you've got to plug that many holes and your entire opening day rotation ends up on the 60-day IL. Now, the reason for this change may be as simple as the Mets making Hefner available. That's something else to keep in mind. Now, there's nothing wrong with the approach I think that Rick Kranitz has brought to the Braves pitching staff the past few years, but if you want to take a step into the present day and maybe the future as far as pitching coaches go, I think that Hefner is going to check a lot of boxes there. He had a lot of success working with some veteran pitchers, big-name guys like Jacob deGrom or Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander. He also had a lot of success with some of the reclamation projects that the New York Mets were trying, whether that was Luis Severino or Sean Manaea. Some very good work was done by Hefner, and he will bring his expertise to the Atlanta coaching staff next season. Now, Richardson is actually a former Braves farmhand who played for them briefly back in 2011. He's just 42 years old, and he's going to slot in at the first base coaching job and pick up the duties that Tom Goodwin, a fellow speedster, was in charge of, and that's helping the Braves on the base paths. So we'll see if he's able to level up Atlanta's base stealing, and we know there are at least a couple of guys who would like to participate in that with Ronald Acuña Jr. and Michael Harris. Ozzie Albies you could throw on the list as well, but there's some speed on this Braves roster. We'll see what Richardson's able to do with that. Now, there is an offseason to get to, so with that in mind, I want to answer a few of your questions about the offseason shopping list and anything else that was on your mind as we officially kick off the hot stove season. So I put the call out on X for your questions, and first up, I've got Eli Shaw, who asked me, do you think that the Braves will pursue a big starting pitcher this offseason, like Zach Gallen or Dylan Cease or Ranger Suarez? I think if there were to be two areas that I look at, and I know shortstop's going to come up in a moment, but I'm just going to lump them together, two areas where the Braves really need to make a substantial move, it would be adding a starting pitcher and adding a shortstop. Not necessarily in that order. The interesting thing about the starting pitching picture is what's your health going to be in 2026? If you have good health, well, you don't need 7, 8, 9 starting pitchers. If you don't have good health, well, you might need 9, 10, or 11 starting pitchers, but you're going to find out over the course of the next season. But preparation, obviously, is a big part of this, and preparing to make this rotation, make this team as competitive as it can possibly be. I would think that a starting pitcher, whether it's an ace-type pitcher, like a Zach Gallen has been in the past, though he was down in 2025. Dylan Cease, I think, is front of the rotation potential, but hasn't necessarily been the steady ace just yet. And Ranger Suarez is kind of one of the more underrated pitchers in the National League. But putting all of that aside, I do think they need at least one starting pitcher who fits the bill of a stabilizer for the rotation. I want you to think about the role that Charlie Morton played, not when he first came over, but those final couple of 3 years. And I know that Charlie had some ups and downs, but when you looked at the end of the year, he had started 30 games, he had thrown 160, 170, 180 innings, and I think the Braves were missing one of those guys last year. And one of those guys was Charlie Morton, who signed with the Baltimore Orioles and eventually made it back to the Braves by the end. But that's the kind of pitcher I think that you need. Somebody who's got some upside, somebody that's got some experience, and somebody who is dependable that you can count on to take the ball every fifth day and just be that 4 or 3 in the rotation if you need him to be, but also knowing that you have Chris Sale and Spencer Strider and Spencer Schwellenbach as a big 3, if you will. And you've got Reynaldo Lopez and perhaps Grant Holmes, and Hurston Waldrop showed you a lot as well. You've got the makings of a very good starting pitching group, but you need the health to make this whole thing pay off. So could they go after a big starting pitcher, one of the big-name guys? I would be a little surprised to see them get into the big free agent bidding war for a starting pitcher, but there's always the possibility of a trade for names that we haven't talked about or thought about. And if you want a great example of that, how about what the Braves did with Chris Sale a couple of years ago? You never know where you may be able to pull off that deal that just makes you better in ways that you maybe couldn't possibly have imagined, and Chris Sale has certainly done that. All right, next question comes from Calvin Fenner on X. He says, there's a real possibility of Ha-Seong Kim signing somewhere else. Do you think Alex maybe goes for a big bat at DH to compensate? I actually don't. I think shortstop is the area that you need to find that answer. As much as I loved and respected what Nick Allen was able to do as a defensive shortstop, you need more out of that position offensively. I think that was one of the holes in the lineup that was exposed when the rest of the Braves lineup was struggling to varying degrees at different times throughout the course of the year. Whether that's signing Ha-Seong Kim, pursuing Bo Bichette, or some kind of trade that could give the Braves an everyday answer to shortstop, that is a situation that very much needs to be solved. It was a hole in 2024 when Orlando Arcia fell apart, and in 2025, while they did get good defense from Nick Allen, it was a black hole in terms of offense. The Braves have got to get more out of that position. So I say all that to come back to DH and tell you, I don't think that they need to go after a big-name DH, a big slugger DH, in the vein of a Marcell Ozuna, which is why I think he's probably played his last game as an Atlanta Brave, though I could be wrong. You look at that DH spot now, it's the opportunity to give Drake Baldwin some extra at-bats, to give Sean Murphy at-bats when he gets healthy, to give Ronald Acuña Jr. at-bats if you just like to give his legs a rest and not have him in right field every single night for 162 games, you have that flexibility among those three guys. So maybe it's finding a really good complementary player that plays a couple of different spots, that maybe is an offensive first profile of a utility player, if that makes sense, and kind of have a bit of a rotation there. I know people really hate platoons. Typically, it seems like people hate those, but maybe that's what the Braves need, and it could be a lot more cost-effective to allow them to throw the money at shortstop or throw the money at starting pitching, or, how about this, throw some money at the bullpen because you've definitely got holes there. Next question is from Dave Vesey. Any updates on the group of guys that finished the season on the injured list? It's been very quiet from the team. I actually heard Alex Anthopoulos on 92.9 The Game on Tuesday talking a bit about Spencer Schwellenbach, saying he is completely healthy, saying that Grant Holmes is looking like he's going to be ready for the start of spring training. Grant actually uploaded some videos of himself throwing off the mound down in Northport, so he continues to work. And it appears that Reynaldo Lopez is also healthy. It seems like all three of those guys are in a good spot. Chris Sale obviously finished the season healthy, as did Spencer Strider. Both of those guys getting a normal offseason, I think, is going to be big for how they show up in 2026. And in particular, how Spencer Strider looks after getting a season of pitching under his belt again after elbow surgery, then having the normal offseason, normal workout program. Will we see a little bit more life on that fastball? We saw a lot of 95 and 96 in 2025, not so much of the 97, 98, and above. Can he find that extra couple of miles an hour on that fastball that will make his arsenal as deadly as it was in 2023 when he was the Major League Baseball strikeout leader? All right, my next question is from Nurse Cindy. With the rumor mill running rampant, one states that Ozzie Albies won't be back. What are your thoughts about Ozzie? Well, we got some news on Tuesday as well from Alex Anthopoulos, who told 92.9 The Game that Ozzie Albies' option will be picked up. I think that was a no-brainer, and I know Ozzie had his worst offensive season by far in 2025. It did appear the last couple of months that he'd started to turn the corner, which leads me to believe that maybe the wrist just wasn't completely healthy over the first 3 months of the year. That's my theory. Putting that aside, bringing Ozzie Albies back to me, again, I feel like is a no-brainer because you have a $7 million club option for him with a $4 million buyout, which basically means you're making a $3 million decision on giving Ozzie Albies the chance at 29 years old to show you that he's still got tread on the tire. I think he does, and I think that it would be just a disaster to have declined that option and allowed him to go get right somewhere else, and then you've got one more question that you've got to answer on this club. I still think Ozzie Albies is a core guy for the Braves because he has value on the field and off, but he's got to get healthy, and he's got to be productive. That's what the Braves need from him. The broken hamate bone at the end of the year really kind of took the steam out of what I felt like was a good second half for Albies. When he comes back for spring training, the Braves are hoping that he's 100% full bore, ready to go, because this is a pivotal year in the career of Ozzie Albies. He needs a bounce-back year big time, and a lot of times I feel like that's some of the best motivation you can get for a player, because all of a sudden he's on a short-term arrangement, and he's going to be playing for that next contract, and you're going to want to put up some of your best years. So the motivation factor will certainly be here, not that that's all that motivates Ozzie Albies. And not only is it a no-brainer, I think, to bring back Ozzie Albies despite the struggles he had last year, well, it's a no-brainer to bring back Chris Sale, the ace of your staff. Club option for $18 million that will be picked up, according to John Heyman of MLB Network. Sale won the Cy Young in his first season with the Braves in 2024. He was definitely in the running last year before he fractured his ribcage, but he came back and looked like he didn't miss a day. He had a .258 ERA. He made 21 overall appearances, 20 of those starts, of course, the one relief appearance when Charlie Morton was back late in the season to have his swan song with the Braves, but a 7-5 record not indicative of just how good Sale was. He struck out 165 batters, just 32 walks and 125 and 2/3 innings, and probably in the Cy Young discussion as well if he had not missed those 9 or 10 starts in the middle of the summer. Now, one of the other things to keep in mind, I think, as far as Chris Sale is concerned, is the possibility of a multi-year extension. Now, whether that's 2 years or 3 years, I think the Braves would be comfortable with that. You could also add on some option years, and then once you get to that point, you could maybe treat him like you did Charlie Morton by guaranteeing a year and adding an option and pretty much doing that for as long as Chris Sale wants to pitch in a Braves uniform, because if he's doing what he's done these first couple of seasons and shown no signs of slowing down, and this is a guy that knows how to pitch, not just throw, I think Chris Sale's a guy the Braves want to have around for a while, and I would not be surprised to see them reach agreement on an extension with Chris Sale this winter. I've gotten a few different versions of this, so let me just throw it as a catch-all, if you will. Are the Braves going to be spending this offseason, or is there more likely to be a big-time trade? Look, I always think there's value to be found on the trade market, and Alex Anthopoulos has been very good at identifying that and making those moves. That being said, I do think it behooves the Braves to get back out and do some spending this year. They reset the luxury tax, whether that was the stated goal or not, which obviously can get you in a lot of trouble if you start talking about how much you want to reset your luxury tax. So I don't know if I need to go into that, but I just want to state it pretty plainly. But the Braves did reset that tax. Now, Alex Anthopoulos has said that tax was never really something that was going to keep them from making a move. They were close to doing a couple of things. Ultimately, those deals did not happen. However you feel about that, obviously we know the moves didn't happen. The money wasn't spent. Braves payroll actually came down in 2025, and I think that means it should be going up in 2026. If you want to maintain your trajectory as one of the best teams in Major League Baseball, you've got to be out there looking to add. The Braves are coming off a year in which they were not even close to one of the best teams in baseball, but the talent is there. If the health can be there, you need to do everything you can at shortstop, starting pitcher, bullpen, whatever the case is, to make this roster stronger and take advantage of the fact that you still have, at least on paper, where the game is most certainly not played, a team that should be in contention on an annual basis. And speaking of money, I'll wrap up with this one from JDOTY47 on X. Do you see the Braves trying to extend Ronald Acuña Jr. early, and if so, what would a contract look like? Short answer, yes. I believe that the Braves should be exploring that, even though they have up to 3 more years of control of Ronald Acuña Jr. through the team options that they have for both 2027 and 2028 that will take him through age 30. Now, what does that deal look like? Well, for starters, you're going to need to go ahead and make that first turn at the road that says $300 million in my eyes. Now, how many years that is, I'm not sure. What the average annual value of that is going to be, I'm also not sure. How badly does Ronald Acuña Jr. want to go ahead and have the stability of signing a new contract? Is he open to doing this? Is that an extension beyond these 3 years? Do you start to move that money around so that you can be more creative about the average annual value and thus the luxury tax and all the other calculus that goes into the team? Sure, I think you got to explore all of that. And it would be better to really start to look into it over the next year or two so that you're able to potentially get this deal done. But there is one question mark that some folks, I'm sure, don't want to talk about or don't want to have it rain on the parade, and that is, can Ronald Acuña Jr. stay healthy over the course of a long-term contract? We don't know the answer to that. And I certainly don't think that means that he needs to take less money or that he needs to not risk going and being a free agent, because there is a team out there, or teams plural, that will be happy to pay Ronald Acuña Jr. one of the highest salaries in this game. And why? Because he has the talent to be one of the top 3 players in the game most years. That's what the Braves are looking at here. So is it $300, $350, $400, $500 million? I don't know, but we're certainly talking about uncharted territory. If you remember, the largest contract the Braves have ever handed out was Austin Riley's 10-year, $212 million contract he signed in 2023. That also has a team option that could bump it up a little bit more. But if you're talking about Ronald Acuña Jr., and I'm talking about the low bar for this feels like $300 million just to get you a ticket to be in the building to start having the conversations about what a 10-year contract could look like with him. And the Braves ultimately have the opportunity to have these conversations over the next 3 years to work it out so that he never becomes a free agent if they feel like that is the move that is best for business for them, which unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, is also part of the equation. You are running a business. How will you balance everything? Where does it all fit? How much sense does that deal make? And can they get the deal done at the number that both parties are happy with? That ultimately is what a contract negotiation is. It does not mean this guy got $500, this guy got $680 million, this guy got $700 and whatever million dollars. But if you think about Ronald Acuña Jr. hitting the free agent market, if it were to happen this winter, I think we'd be talking about one of those monster contracts that we've seen the past few years. And I would tell you, based on talent, that Ronald Acuña Jr. has the potential to be worth every single penny of a deal like that. All right, so with that said, we have covered a lot of things on our first off-season edition of From the Diamond. I appreciate you, as always, making this part of your baseball podcast regimen. Make sure you subscribe to From the Diamond wherever you get your podcast. If you want a good way to keep up with everything I've got going on, you can head on over to FromTheDiamond.com. There are links to everything right at the top navigation, and I'll be coming your way with articles and other good stuff throughout the course of the winter, and looking forward to a trip down to Orlando for the winter meetings, but that is not until December, and the Braves, we've seen in the past, like to strike early. Alex Anthopoulos hinted at that on Tuesday. Maybe the Braves will get something done, and we'll have more to talk about here soon on the next episode of the show. Once again, thank you for listening. I appreciate it. This has been From the Diamond. I am Grant McAuley, and until next time, so long, everyone.